Welcome to Realizing Resilience, a podcast from the Connecticut Women's Consortium. We're not behavioral health professionals, but we're your gateway to real conversations with the experts. Each episode, we'll delve into the vast landscape of mental health, from personal stories to expert insights. Together, we'll bridge the gap between clinical expertise and personal experiences, connecting with diverse voices and perspectives. Join us for insightful conversations that demystify the world of mental health.
Daniel Cohen, LCSW, is a psychotherapist in private practice based in Hamden, Connecticut, who recently published the book, It's Not All About You, The Secret Joy of Practical Humility. The book contains 70 humility paths or mental happiness tools, which he often uses as a CBT exercise with his clients to change the way they look at life, helping them with depression, anxiety, and interpersonal relationships. He is also a pastor at a congregational church in Burlington, Connecticut, but respects and loves people of all faiths, including atheists and agnostics, and describes himself as a Jewish Christian with Buddhist tendencies.
Hello and welcome back to Realizing Resilience. I am Marisa.
And I'm Alana.
And today we have the pleasure of speaking with Daniel Cohen. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Alana and Marisa.
I'm going to start off this conversation by asking if you can share with us the inspiration behind your book on humility and its significance in the world today.
Okay. Well, a couple things happened. One was that I had a deacon at the church that I was first at back in about 96. That's 1996. Anyhow, he said to me one day, Dan, it's not all about you. And I was like, he loved me. It was a nice thing. He said it. And then my Uncle Winston came to the same church, and I was sitting with a friend, somebody who he'd met, previously, but didn't have any, strong relationship with. And he asked me, how long the person had been in town. And I said, 3 weeks. And he got very upset, and he said, 3 weeks, 3 weeks? She's been here 3 weeks and nobody bothered to call me? And I was like, okay, I apologized, and he kept going, but then, finally the person started preaching and he stopped. And then the second the service was over, he came at me again with 3 weeks, 3 weeks. And I said, you know what? It's not all about you, Winston. 3 weeks. It's not all about you, Winston. 3 weeks. So this kind of became the inspiration for the title, It's Not All About You. And it was, something that I realized was, really important. And I had an issue with my own ego. So I joke at the beginning of the book that if my ego had applied for statehood, it would have become the 4th largest state in the union right after Texas, Alaska, and California. And of course, that's a line lifted from Saturday Night Live when they were talking about Bryant Gumbel way back in the day. And I kind of also realized that as I was, thinking about humility and, how much it gave me peace, that there were 2 questions that society has us asking ourselves all the time. And one is, what can I get out of life, and am I getting enough? And the other is, what do other people think of me? And, these kind of drive consumer spending, because if you're asking, what can I get out of life, and am I getting enough? You're thinking, I need to get more stuff. Kind of like the he who dies with the most toys wins, right? And then if you're asking, what do other people think of me? You're trying to keep up with the Joneses. And I don't imagine that this is something that, a cadre of old men, drinking Jack Daniels and smoking cigars are, sitting there, we'll make them think this. It's kind of a natural thing that comes about. And we have consumerism, which is essentially the global religion today. So, humility says, let's think about it differently. Instead of let's think about what can I get out of life, we should think, what can I give to life? And instead of what do others think of me? I'm also a pastor, so what does God think of me? Or if you don't believe in God, at least what do I think of myself is a better way of thinking than what do other people think of me? So, that's sort of in a nutshell where I'm coming from with the book.
Yeah. And so talking about humility, you were sort of mentioning this a little bit, that it's this sort of like broader, multifaceted thing. And there's a lot that it ties into outside of the self and your relationships to others. So how would you define humility, and why is it so important, and what's its place kind of in the different arenas of our life?
Okay, so that's an excellent question, but multi-layered, so I'll have a lot to talk about. But yeah, yes.
That's totally okay.
That's okay. So the definition I came up with, and it turns out that there's actually more definitions of humility than there are New Yorkers with opinions. So, it's just surprising. But, when you look into it, there's not actually one definition of humility, right? Or you look in humility on Webster and it says, the act of being humble, right? One of these definitions that doesn't define anything. So, what I came up with ultimately is it's kind of an all-encompassing definition. And in fact, I ran it by some scientists who were working on humility, and they liked the first two parts, but they thought the third part was separate. But I could easily make the case that it's not. But anyway, let me give you the definition. The definition I came up with is that it's first putting yourself in perspective, which is not to think too high, too low, or too often of yourself. And that's what my book is about. And the second is accepting everything we don't like about life, but cannot change. And the third is being thankful for everything we do like about life. So the scientists who got back to me said they liked the first two parts, but they thought Thanksgiving was separate. But, you could easily make the case that obviously that is part of humility, is being thankful. So that would speak to the definition. Humility in the workplace, right, is an interesting topic, or a place where humility can be used. And people think that, arrogant people do better, but actually, there have been studies where CEOs of top companies have been found to have humility as a trait. So humility actually helps you because people like people who are humble and they want to help them. So it can be very valuable in the workplace. And there's a great quotation that I have in the book. And one of the great things I think about the book is that there's so many wonderful quotations from other people who say things better than I do. Anyway, the quotation is that there's no limit to what can be done if it doesn't matter who gets the credit. So then when it comes to, humility and mental health, there's 70 humility paths in the book. And those can also be called mental happiness tools. So they're a way of cognitive behavioral therapy and a way of thinking differently about life. And really, it comes down to the fact that life isn't the problem, it's how we think about life that's the problem, right? Are we looking at our glasses of life as half full or half empty, right? So if we're having the right attitude, even bad things we can take and learn from. But, one of the examples, and this is actually not in this book, it's in my next book, is the path of the surfer, which is that the surfer looks at the waves, and instead of being afraid that they're going to drown, they look at the wave and say, "Oh, the bigger the wave, or the bigger the problem, or the bigger the challenge, the better. I'm going to ride this wave," and that's a different way of looking at life. And then when it comes to relationships, the first 16 paths are all about helping you get along with other people. So, paths like the path of forgiveness, the path of not judging. There's several paths about that. One of the paths I particularly like is the path of recognizing other people are other me's. So, if you have a boss you're not getting along with, or somebody in your life who bothers you, you realize that if you had been born with their DNA and had gone through their experiences, you'd be treating yourself the same way. And another path that I really like a lot is the idea that even if you are correct, we don't know when we judge somebody, we don't know their circumstances, right? But we can't, so we don't know everything about them, so we can't really judge them. But even if we're correct that they're lower than us and spiritually, right? Or maturity wise, they could be living up to their potential more than we're living up to ours. So that's an interesting way of looking at things.
Those are great perspectives. I had a teacher once, a professor in school, who would grade us based on what we achieved, not like the quality of it, but the quality of it based on who we are and what we could achieve. And I feel like that is also really important, just realizing that different people could be fulfilling different things in different ways because their ability to achieve could be different. I think it's a really awesome way to think about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's wonderful, but I would wonder, if the prof I would have an issue with maybe the professor is judging me as being too capable or not capable enough. So that could be tricky.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Grade wise, definitely can be have some issues there for sure.
Yeah, grading, I mean, obviously that's an issue, right? When you're being graded for something, and then how do you grade somebody, right? So I wrote the book, and I wrote it for sort of everybody, so that I think humility can benefit everyone, right? So in other words, I have a little equation, which is that happiness is better than money because people seek money in order to be happy. Whether it actually will make them happy or not is another question, but that's the reason that they seek money. But humility is actually better than happiness because it will make you happy and it will make you a better person, which will make you and God happier. So I promote that, but eventually we do have a conversation about God later on in the book because, that's one part of humility, right? Recognizing that there's a being or something bigger than us. So that's sort of one of the things that we focus on.
You were also touching on something that I think is really important, just kind of the different teachings in your book. And how have you used those teachings? I'm curious how you use those teachings and also the humility pathways in your private practice.
Well, first of all, I tend to give the book to most people I see as a therapist, especially if they're a couple. Though, I might say, well, if there's two of you, I'll buy it for one of you and you can buy the other one. So, you know, that seems fair. Or they can share the book. But, it's those first 16 paths, right, about dealing with other people, right, and how you can, be humble when you're with someone and those are kind of keys to getting along with somebody else. And I recently sort of had an epiphany in my own marriage when someone got me a different book called The Meaning of Marriage. And it was a book by a guy named Tim Keller. I basically came to realize that marriage isn't about finding somebody to make you happy. It's about finding somebody who you can serve and share God's love with. And that's a real challenge. And it changes the way you look at marriage. And when you start to really appreciate the person and not think about how are they making me happy or not happy, it can change your whole life and your whole view. One of the things that I'll do, like in my private practice, is somebody's, as I said, if they're having interpersonal problems, then I'll talk to them about, or I'll have them refer them to one of these 16 paths that deal with getting along with other people. But, if they have low self-esteem, I might refer them to the part of the book where we talk about not thinking too low of yourself. Because remember, humility is not thinking too high, too low, or too often of yourself, right? So, I had a friend of mine, actually, he used to be a client and he's now a friend, which, it doesn't always happen. You try to keep those boundaries, but, we had I'd left the place where I was working with him, so we didn't see each other anymore as a therapist. Anyway, he was complaining to me. He's somebody who really was into the book when I was creating it. And he said, some people have this other problem, which is that they think too low of themselves. What does the book say about that? And, he felt that, he says, I'm a really good person, but, I want to really, affirm that. I came to realize that, that was really, he wound up in the book, with this conversation that we had. And, it made me realize that it's really important to build up self-esteem. And then he would also claim that maybe I was talking about being too humble. Well, you couldn't be too humble based on my definition, right? If the definition includes not thinking too low of yourself, then you can't be too humble. So it's all, a matter of how you're looking at it. But that was one thing I would do is I would, refer people to those paths if they had low self-esteem. And then if they have control issues, like people with trauma do, I would talk about these paradoxes, right? Which is the first paradox of control, which is that the more we try to control what we can't control, which is the outer world. And we spend very little time trying to control what we can control, which is our attitudes towards the world. So that's the first paradox of control. The second paradox of control is the more you give up trying to control others and trying to control the world, the less power others in the world have over you. So that would be another way that I would help them with that. Or I might even, read them one of the humility paths, but that doesn't usually happen, and I might more likely refer them to that.
Do you have any advice for people who are looking to become more humble or cultivate humility in their lives? Like, where do you start?
Well, first of all, read my book. Second of all, read my book. Third of all, no, just kidding. So I would say, right, that just the fact that you're trying to become more humble shows that you have a good head start on people who aren't trying to become humble. So one of the problems we have in society, and you hear the word a lot, is narcissism. So one of the things that I'm thinking of trying to promote the book is to say that this is the antidote to narcissism, right? Because humility to narcissism is like light is to dark. You can't be both at the same time. And so, as far as humility goes, you want to look for ways to take the focus off of yourself. So we live in a very self-centered society. It's all about me, right? And it's kind of natural for us to think about ourselves first because we're living inside this body, perceiving the world. And you think, well, it is about me, right? And yet, in a sense, we have to remind ourselves continually that it's not all about us, right? That we're just part of a larger universe. We're part of a larger world. And when we do that, it takes a lot of pressure off of ourselves. The issue that we have is that we become self-centered, and that can be exciting sometimes with, the ego gets its, pleasure and all of that. But at the same time, it can also make us very self-conscious, and it can make us self-centered. Self-centered leads to self-conscious, it leads to anxiety, leads to selfishness, right? All of these things that, we become the center of our universe, and anything that could happen to us or might happen to us becomes worrisome. Whereas if you're focusing on what you can give, right, and you're thinking about how can I be a blessing to other people, it takes all of that pressure off of yourself, right? You take the focus off of yourself and you put it out there. And so when you're doing that, you're not nervous. You're not really worried the way that you would be if you were, focusing in on yourself, right? So the other thing I think that's really important is that we take care of ourselves. So, this is now I'm getting into the next book, but I'm writing a book now called, based on the second part of the definition, which is accepting everything you don't like about life but cannot change. And that is called being okay and being okay with not being okay. So the basic idea is that we should do everything we can to be okay. And then when we fail and we choose and we realize that, for instance, it's something in the past that we can't change, but we're still fuming over it. And the second we realize that we wasted our time not being okay with something we should have been okay with, that we just forgive ourselves and say, you know what? I'm okay with that. So there's that self-acceptance. And of course, that can lead to a slippery slope because then it means like, well, does that mean you go ahead and sin all you want or do bad things and say, well, hey, that's just, okay. Well, you don't really want to do that either. So you got to kind of recognize and have balance and also recognize like what level you're at and, accept it, but at the same time, try to move towards, a higher level. So one of the things though that I talk about in the book, or that I haven't written it yet, but that I want to talk about is the importance of taking care of yourself. If I don't get enough sleep, I'm not going to be a good person. If I'm not eating right, that's not going to be good for me either, right? So you have to take care of yourself. You have to have, do the things that are really self-care, mentally, physically, spiritually, all of that, right? You really want to, nurture yourself because you can't be your best self when you're not doing that, when you're not taking care of yourself, when you're not having your needs met. And one of those things that I think people need to do, and not everybody does it, is to really, focus on themselves in the morning when they get up and either meditate or pray or do something, but really to ground themselves. If I don't get my, daily dose or my vitamins, that you might call it, and also, if you have medicines, take your meds. I mean, that's one thing, right? So many of you get clients, right? If you've worked in psychotherapy and you find out they stopped taking their meds and they didn't do so well. So, whatever works for you, you need to do it. And I think part of that needs to be taking some time, especially in the morning before you start your day, of getting your sort of spiritual vitamins in and really taking care of yourself that way so that you've got your focus. A lot of times, one of the problems we have, especially as modern folks, is that we're so busy trying to do stuff and get things accomplished that we don't center ourselves. And we really need to do that. We really need to take a breath, relax, center yourself. One thing I've found lately is that I'll go and I'll be at a stoplight. And, if it's just turned red, I know I've got a few seconds. And I'll take a deep breath and close my eyes and take a deep breath out. I met a woman once. Her name is Patty DeYosa. She's 90 years old, and she's written some books. Anyway, she's kind of a spiritual thinker. She knew a guy named Gurdjieff, who was a famous guy back in the day. She said that she was working as a reporter, and she realized that she was rushing, and had to get something done, and she realized she'd forgotten to breathe. Well, obviously she's still breathing, right? Because she's still alive. But, maybe she meant also that she forgot to really feel the breath. And it's something when you actually just take that breath during the time that and anybody can do it. It only takes 10, maybe 20 seconds, but it can be a good way to sort of stop yourself from running on the hamster wheel too much.
I think that's an aspect that people don't really think, is that part of becoming less self-absorbed is also kind of like giving yourself grace and being present with yourself, understanding yourself in a more human way, other than thinking about like your perception on other people or how can you like get your way. That's an important aspect of it as well. And I think that's probably something that people are not really thinking about.
Right. I mean, if you're thinking about getting your way, that a lot of times also you may be cutting people off when they're talking to you, and you're thinking about getting your point across. You're not really absorbing the world, right? So part of spiritual growth is being able to be present and to be present to life. And life is always bringing new things and people into your world, and it's fascinating, and life is always teaching you things. So you really want to start looking at problems as challenges, and also as things that are designed by life or God, or however you want to perceive it, to help you grow, because that's really what's happening. You may not realize it, but that's what's happening. So you have all these life lessons, and the more you can learn so much in a day if you're paying attention.
Those are some great points that you had brought up too, and just kind of self-reflection, different ways you can really shape the world and maybe get some relief and put some weight off of your chest and use the time that you can to help others and also helping yourself. So these were great conversations that we had today.
Well, yeah, and you guys are doing some great work here, and it's good to get the word out, right? I think the Dalai Lama says that basically thinking of others is sort of, he said, compassion is the key to happiness. So of course, you may think that you want to get your needs met, and maybe you do to a certain degree have to do that. But the more you spread love and help others, the more comes back to you. In Buddhism and Hinduism, they call it karma. And in Christianity, it's you reap what you sow. So if you're going around spreading lots of love in all these different ways in your life, it's going to come back to you. So in a way, it's selfish. But but the funny thing is this: if you don't do it in order to get that good stuff back, then you get even more good stuff back. So it's really that's rather ironic, but so in other words, the most selfish thing to do is to be selfless.
That was a wonderful quote to end it on. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was, again, like Marisa said, a great conversation. And yeah, this is a concept that so many people can apply to their practice or just take to improve themselves.
Amen. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Links will be in the description to learn more about Daniel and his work, and keep up with us at the Connecticut Women's Consortium. Thank you for joining us today, and see you next time.